But in order to talk about the LGBTQIA community of today, I need to start by having you all go back in time with me. About 53 years to be specific. It's a summer night deep into June of 1969, and the air is hot. That humidity pushes people inside of the buildings. A gay bar in New York City is busier than usual. The mafia run Stonewall Inn had the under the table tactics in its running that made it hardier than the average gay bar. It wasn't a luxurious establishment. The mafia knew that they could slack off when it came to health and safety regulations. So the watered down liquor was served in used glasses due to the lack of running water behind the bar. People were overcharged and underserved, but it was home, an oasis in a desert of forced conformity. In a time where you could be arrested and forcibly outed in the raids, the stakes were high. But in those walls, you could hold hands without being beaten by the police. And Stonewall proved, in liquor and in inclusivity, watered down was better than nothing. Unbeknownst to the patrons on that late summer night, they had walked into a moment in history. I think that oftentimes we don't realize the moments that will become history until they are happening. And I like to think that in those early morning hours of June 28th, they felt something. Maybe it was the fact that it was the second raid on the premises in the last week. Maybe it was the arrests and the beatings over the years. Whatever it was, as the cops were being unnecessarily forceful in their arresting of some trans women, the riot erupted. Reportedly, a brick was thrown, though some say it was a shoe or a bottle, and it was the match that lit the flame of resistance. For the rest of that night and the following nights of that weekend, Greenwich and other surrounding areas had an outpour of queer people rioting near Stonewall. People attempted to organize, they threw things, they came together, and their existence and resistance sent a clear message. Enough was enough. On the anniversary in 1970, they marched from Greenwich Village to Central Park. With that, the first Pride Parade was born, and with it, a new option, a refusal to hide, a refusal to conform. Pride. I can't imagine how hard that choice must have been. The stakes were horrifyingly high. The forced outings would often lead to a person's entire life being upheaved. Rejection from people in your life, loss of housing and employment. That doesn't even include conversion therapy or outright violence that they were at risk to experience. For some, the yearly prides must have not been very different from the oasis of the bars before. You came out to Pride and you partied, and then you went home, back to the way the world was before. And there's that struggle. Do we conform or expand? It's an old conversation that goes all the way back to that beginning. And nowadays, when people talk about Stonewall, if they want to come across like they know what they're talking about, they will mention Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. And legends say that they threw everything from bricks to shot glasses and led the charge during the riots. Most accounts of it had details that were conflicting, but everyone memorizes those names. It's difficult to speculate as to what terms they would be comfortable using in the current time, but at the time they referred to themselves as drag queens, though a lot of these terms had different connotations at the time. They were sex workers, and they used that energy that had stirred during and immediately after Stonewall to co-found a homeless shelter for gay and trans youth called the Star House. It would end up opening and closing multiple times over the years as they didn't have enough funding to continue. These two people stood at the forefront of the gay liberation movement and marched and protested and fought for the rest of their lives. You hear a paragraph like that and you almost picture someone larger than life. The reality is they were just two people, and young ones at that. On the fourth anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, a feminist activist was giving a speech that was harshly critical of drag queens. And Sylvia and a fellow drag queen went on stage, and Sylvia gave her famous gay power speech. To these people, Sylvia represented a part of the community that took away from their message. A proud person of color who was gender nonconforming and a sex worker. But she wouldn't shy away. She described the atrocious violence against drag queens and other gender nonconforming and queer people that they faced when they were in jail. The exact kind of people some of those in the crowd spoke of with such derision. I'll read a bit of that quote to y'all now. I have been beaten. I have had my nose broken. I have been thrown in jail. I have lost my job. I have lost my apartment for gay liberation. And you all treat me this way? What the fuck's wrong with y'all? Think about that. I do not believe in revolution, but you all do. I believe in the gay power. I believe in us getting our rights, or else I would not be out there fighting for our rights. That's all I wanted to say to you people. She was 22 years old that day, 22 years old, and storming a stage and shouting gay power to booze. I think of what I was doing at 22, and it's just struggled to think of anything nearly as remarkable. I probably wrote a couple okay poems, but that's about it. Talk about a juxtaposition. I remember in history class when we'd go over huge historical events, and particularly during struggles under oppression, and so many people were quick to say that they wouldn't have stood for it. But I think the last 6 years, the last 3 in particular, show that when the moment comes for you to say something, to do something, sometimes it feels harder. The risks are tangible, the hypothetical distance extinguished, and with it, the ambiguity that afforded you a lack of doubt. When it comes down to it, it's hard to be brave. And unfortunately, it leaves those of us with less of a choice, less of an ability to pass or conform, with the hardest of the work. Sylvia knew that people would rest on their laurels even though there was work to be done. Because for most, doing the work felt too risky. I think one of the main things that made it feel so risky was everyone felt isolated. When I was 22, all I needed to do to feel close to other queer people was log into a website like Tumblr. But the outside world was less accessible before the modern age. The only access was the television or radio, really. And in 1977, Anita Bryant was the kind of voice you heard when you turned on your TV or radio. 1977 was the year Anita Bryant, who at the time was a musician turned brand ambassador for the Florida Citrus Commission, was trying to repeal an ordinance in Dade County, Florida, that prevented discrimination against queer people. It was a groundbreaking and surprisingly progressive policy, and she wanted nothing to do with it. She wanted it gone. She was a voice for the hate that many people had for gay people. And on a television appearance where she was preaching this hate, a person named Tom Higgins walked up and threw a pie in her face. Schadenfreude is defined as pleasure derived from another person's misfortune. I took a break when I was writing this section specifically to Google that and confirm that I was pronouncing and defining exactly what I felt when I read about Anita Bryant getting pied in the face on television. Am I a particularly malicious person? I like to think not, but no one's perfect. But it's not just that justice of watching a woman who sought to humiliate and legislatively discriminate against an oppressed group get humiliated on television. It's that every LGBTQIA person watching that saw it, that you can fight back, that you can resist, that there were other people already doing it, that the systemic injustice could be fought any day, not just during Pride. And there were so many people up against it. Anita Bryant was only one person among a disheartening many that wanted gay people to just go away. The sort of people that took a sick satisfaction when the AIDS epidemic began. The AIDS epidemic further stigmatized the LGBTQIA plus community and combined with bigotry, created a misinformation monster. To this day, it still has a lot of association with the LGBTQIA plus community and was at first seen as an exclusively gay disease. I've been a queer history nerd for years, and I didn't learn that there are so many people living a full and long life while HIV positive until my first Pride, when a man spoke to me about his own diagnosis decades prior. He had been diagnosed the year I was born. And that's part of the monster, isn't it? The fear and othering that occurs to those within the community that live with a positive diagnosis. That kind of ostracizing that leads to it being discussed in more hushed tones. On the other hand, I feel that sometimes people can have this sick fascination with the tragedy of queerness. This morbid curiosity furthers the narrative that queerness is a sad story with a sad ending. It further dehumanizes a group of people that have been through so much. And with the rampant misinformation and internalized societal garbage, it's so easy to misspeak on this subject that I know so little about. There's a lot to be worried about. I do think I can speak on transgenerational trauma, though. A common phrase I hear in the community is that we lost a generation of queer people to AIDS. And while there are people that were out and living in that time that are still here, that phrase carries a lot with it. A generation full of people that would have innovated and built upon what had begun. They would have laughed and made memories and art and arguments and clever observations. They would have lived. So much of the momentum that had been building was snuffed out. We still feel the echoes today. We still don't always feel steady on our feet. So many lessons are being learned right now because we didn't have as many people to learn them for us. I have never personally lost someone because of HIV, but I feel the echoes of pain in every silence as we trail off when the subject comes up. I feel the echoes of the pain in every such a shame, we say, in place of any response of significance. I sometimes get this feeling that I'm standing in the middle of a field caked in ashes, saying something beautiful lived here, could live again, if only we remembered. And that's where I think we are now, trying to remember what was being built before and doing our best to be building upon it. And so much has changed in such a small amount of time. In the years before I came out, I watched a television show with my father that had queer people in it, a mainstream television show that wasn't rated R and wasn't seen as inherently perverted. I would sit stock still during the LGBTQIA scenes and live vicariously and quietly as I felt something build within me, an unmistakable truth. I think that's one of the biggest differences. There are now so many points of reference that you can see bits of yourself in, points of reference out in the open, normalized. That open representation and dialogue has led to a lot of old conversations opening up, conversations I am now alive and able to participate in. Growing up, when I first heard about queer people, I heard of the fight for equality phrased as the gay rights movement. It wasn't until recently that I first heard the phrase queer liberation movement. What a powerful phrase. On the surface, they seem like they're saying the same thing, right? Gay rights are wanting rights for people in the LGBTQ plus community to be equal to those outside of it. And queer liberation is seeking a liberation from the oppression currently experienced by people in the LGBTQIA plus community. I think that's where the similarities end. The gay rights movement has a definitive end goal, but I think the queer liberation movement, by definition, should not. Queerness not only questions the avenue for which we can exist romantically and sexually, it also questions the destination. Suddenly, there are these options that are seen as equally valid that do not involve the nuclear family ideal. Perhaps the queer liberation movement views queerness as expansion, an ever growing and ever evolving definition of what it means to exist freely as a queer person. It rejects the narrative of a set framework. I understand why people would not like that very much. We're supposed to have these clear cut goals so we can feel that our efforts are fruitful. Many of us are not built for emotional marathons. It's hard enough to sprint as it is. So there's that question. There since the beginning. There in every queer person. Gay rights or queer liberation? Conform or expand? I think no person is completely on one side of it. Like a lot of things with the queer community, I think you could say it's a spectrum. I feel like I have these two parts of myself at war. The first part of me spent the first 16 years of my life terrified that I was some sick, depraved person. I planned on spending the rest of my life repressing all of these urges that hungered within me. I'd cling to storylines in movies and shows that had people doing what I secretly wanted to do. I'd wait in quiet anticipation to get to see bits of myself on a screen. Over time, I got less and less afraid when I pushed it down. Eventually, I saw that I could live a normal life and still be who I was. And the other half of me comes alive during Rocky Horror, sees the merit in living in absolute pleasure. It revs its engines when Lady Gaga says, I need to put my paws up. That part of me feels that queerness, like what was said of art, was supposed to disturb those that lived comfortably. That part of me puts glitter on my face in the bathroom at Southern Nights, even though I thought people would think it was weird. That part of me says I could be normal if I wanted to be, but why would I choose something that boring for myself? I see these parts of me reflected all over the community. This fear that by being too queer, we will lose the ground we've gained. But we have a need to be ourselves anyway for the people who couldn't, the people who can't. We don't lose ground by being ourselves. There is no such thing as too weird among the weird people. No one can be too gay. We just are who we are. And this policing that we do just takes over for all of the people that have tried to silence us for their own comfort. I think I lose a bit of myself every time I've diluted my queerness to fit into spaces that weren't right for me just to make other people happy. How many pieces of ourselves have we given away? Maybe those pieces are the ground we've lost. But I think we've lost ground for another reason. I think we have lost ground because we have lost so much of our culture through a history of slipping through the cracks, and with it, so much of our knowledge of our history as well. It breaks my heart more than words can say that a majority of the things that I've learned about queer history have been through microblogging websites on the internet. It hurts that the only time I've ever heard queerness mentioned in a classroom, it was a very sanitized hypothetical that some people may experience, like it was some distant lurking possibility. It also breaks my heart to think of the people that have tried to bring queer history into the classroom and have often lost their jobs because of it. So many of the generations before us are not here to teach it themselves. Their lives and their stories, a patch on a quilt several tons in weight. I watch people on this newer app, TikTok, have the same dumb discourse and drama that was had on this older website, Tumblr, 10 years ago. I often think of the corporations that put a rainbow on their logo while they quietly donate to organizations that perform conversion therapy. I think about the sick irony that during a month where we're supposed to celebrate all of the progress that we've made, there's people on the internet saying asexual should be considered queer. Well, I'm being told I should buy gay Tide Pods. I haven't even been here for much time in terms of the plot, and even I know we've lost the plot. Every second that we decide these trivial debates are more important than unification is a second we're closer to losing the fragile ground we have somehow been handed by those before us. The ground we stand on is not stable. It never has been. You don't get your rights by saying please and thank you. You cannot polite your way into being considered a human being that deserves basic human decency. I keep thinking about this tweet that I saw a while ago. It said, don't kill the part of you that is cringe, kill the part of you that cringes. To translate modern slang, don't remove what you find shameful, remove your shame. Shame, fear, and rejection seek to minimize the expansion that queerness inherently could be. We tell the people in leather they should put their kinky identity away while we're escorted along the parade route by cops, members of the institution that were beating those gender nonconforming people at Stonewall. We're escorted by members of the same institution that motivated us to protest in the first place, the institution we have fought so hard against. It's important to remember where we came from. We need to remember that righteous rage that burned in the veins and pushed those that came before us forward past what anyone thought was possible. When we forget where we came from and what we fought for, we forget where we need to go and what we're fighting towards. The truth I think it is important for people to realize and fully internalize is there is no one way to be queer. Because that's the thing about a group of people. If you put 10 people that are a part of a group in a room, you're going to hear 12 opinions. I don't think that there will be a time where everyone agrees. And I think that's okay. In fact, I think that's important. We have this opportunity to build a cultural identity for ourselves. And these conversations are how we do it. What I fear is that we're basing our identity on the opinions of people that don't have to live with our truth. I think it's important that we question why we have the opinions that we have. Because if we try to be queer in a way that is comfortable for those that are not queer, at what point does that dilution become self-sacrifice? I don't think we should focus on being palatable. I think we should focus on being ourselves. And when we try to be cookie cutter in our queerness, we eat away at any possible progress. I'm going to end this with a quote that I think perfectly encapsulates that fighting spirit the community has when we're at our best. It's from a music producer that was a co founder of Lookout Records, which helped release music from a genre called queercore or homocore. As the name implies, it was music in the alternative genre, like metal or punk, that is about queerness specifically. It was intentionally provocative and boundary pushing, had unabashed pride and confidence. The documentary that I heard it in was an homage to that movement, that resilience that forges forward with an authenticity and a full spirited middle finger to societal expectations. When looking to the future of the LGBTQIA community, he said this: "What I feel is that people are going to have to keep reinventing themselves. And I would really hope that people keep pushing and keep challenging. I think there's still plenty of room for that. I don't know if somebody's going to start the 21st century version of queer punk or homocore, or if it's necessary or even possible. But people need to keep moving boundaries and exploring new territories. That's kind of what it means to be a human being." And that was said by Larry Livermore. So, how is the queer community doing after 53 years? I don't know, but I can't wait to find out where we go. Thank you.